Coating artwork in thick epoxy resin has become really popular. At the paint spot, we've been doing it for years. Our last product though, we noticed that it was quite smelly to work with and it yellowed over time. So we found a new product called ArtResin, and I'm going to share with you some practical advice on how you can avoid some of the issues that happen with epoxy resins, as well as learning how to get the most yield per package. So in this video, we're talking about artwork on paper on board. If you're working with acrylics or oils on a board, then you'll want to skip forward to this part in the video where we talk about exactly how to do that. Meantime though, there's a lot of things that you should know before you get started so you are more successful and your product is used more affordably. In my own work, I like to combine drawings, handmade papers, and acrylic all into a canvas surface, coating the papers so that when you put on your gels and your varnishes and your resins, that you don't get a buckling of the paper going translucent on you. Product smearing, so your graphite, your watercolors, all of those can smear if you try to brush on a water-based product. I like GAC 500. I use it for nearly everything. It works wonderfully. No smearing of any of those products. I contacted Golden to get their secret way of describing why it works so good. And they said, oh, well, we actually recommend MSA varnish for that. And of course, this makes sense because MSA varnish spray, you're not brushing across the surface, you're spraying. That's ideal. It's also a mineral solvent acrylic, not water-based. So you can go ahead and spray this on most watercolors, markers, drawing, charcoal, graphite, all of those you can spray and give a nice acrylic coating, and then it's durable and permanent. Then if you want to do your resin coating on top, you're not going to disturb anything. With some markers, you'll want to test ahead of time because the solvent might dissolve or cause the marker to bloom. So do check that ahead of time. I avoid using it because it's smelly. I don't have a well-ventilated studio. My studio is right on the main floor of my house. So I tend to stay away from this, although it is the easiest thing you can use. My product of GAC 500 is often recommended for an isolation coat for murals. We have lots of mural tips on our website, should you want to know about that. But GAC 500 I have found to be a great coater. I don't know why it works over graphite and charcoal and Conte and watercolor. I like to coat my paintings first. Even some markers you can brush on quite quickly and it won't smear. So I'm going to share with you that trick. I like that it has a sort of a satin finish. It's not overly glossy and it levels out the brush strokes. I use it pure, undiluted. I like that strength and film integrity.
Gluing items to a birch panel is simple with Stevenson acrylic gel. Be sure you coat right to all the edges, a nice smooth even coating, no lumps or bumps. I also will coat the surface that I'm sticking it to just to make sure there's good contact. Pressing down carefully, making sure there's no wrinkles and bubbles, and getting right to the edges. If necessary, you may have to touch up the corners with a bit more gel just to make sure there's nothing going to curl up or pop out of the resin once you have it coated. I let it stick over the edge. We can always cut it off later. So old telephone book pages are excellent surfaces to glue upon. You can smear the gel down and you don't have a messy table surface and there's no transfer of glue to the front of your artwork. At this gluing stage, you want to make sure that everything is smooth, there's no hairs or debris on the surface because they will create lumps later. And when you're placing things, you want to make sure you're working from the center of the artwork out so everything is applying smoothly and all the little bubbles are then chased to the edges.
One of the things that people have a hard time figuring out is the yield per package. So here's a little container, that's how it comes. 8-ounce package covers 2 square feet. And it's confusing because when you open it up, it says 8 ounces covers 2 square feet, and then you get 2 4-ounce containers. So the two together, one is the resin, one is the hardener. The resin actually says resin on the lid, which is really important. When you've poured out the product, so you go to put the lids back on, don't put the hardener lid on the resin lid or you will glue it shut and then you can't use your product. And again, we want to make sure your products go a long way. So 2 parts together make the 8-ounce. So when you buy the kit on the website, it's 2 16-ounce containers that makes the 32-ounce size. It's 2 half-gallon containers that makes the 1-gallon size. So your paint yield for this little package says 2 square feet. 2 square feet. What is that? What is that? Well, here's the visual. It's a 12 by 12 inch canvas. So this package will coat 2 of these. A 32 ounce kit will coat 8 of these. A 1 gallon kit will coat 32 of these. A 2 gallon kit will coat 64 of these. And should you want a 10 gallon bucket, it will coat 320 canvases. So think about that yield when you're looking online and ordering it, because it becomes quite cost effective the higher size that you go. So 1 by 1, that's 1 square foot. There are 2 things that epoxy resin will not stick to. One is wax, so don't put epoxy on an encaustic painting. We know from pouring it on top that over time you can just lift it right off the surface. The other thing it doesn't stick to is vinyl. So if you want to protect your edges, so you want to have that nice edge on something, just coat it in tape. So we'll be demonstrating that today. And if you have a vinyl tablecloth and your artwork is unlevel and you find it's all pooling off onto the surface, you can just lift it off and maybe save it. So while it was wet, I added some jewelry bits into it. So now at least this clear coating, I can cut and paste and paint on the back or do whatever I want and maybe recycle it into a collaged art piece later. So no waste of product. With a vinyl tablecloth, it'll just pop off. One note, as artwork, this is quite brittle, and the older it gets, the more brittle it becomes. We had one on the shelf and customers over time just testing it snapped it. The other thing to note, even something coated in paper over time will snap as well. So any paper item, you want to make sure that it is on a canvas or on a board. I recommend boards. They stay rigid. A canvas has a tendency to kind of hammock. So the more product you go on, the weight weighs it down. You'll have thin edges and thick centers, which wastes a lot of product to get a nice even coating. So if you're going to pour this on a stretch canvas, make sure you've got a masonite board or gator board or something rigid underneath to give it support so you don't have that hammock effect. So no wax, no vinyl, protect against hammock or work on wood. That's my tips.
Gather the materials you may need. These include rubber gloves, plastic containers, stir sticks, cards for moving the liquid resin, a heat gun. Okay, so figuring out your paint yields. This birch panel happens to be 16 by 16. So I either have to measure accurately my resin and my hardener, or I can just say, I only have to come up with 2 square feet, and this is 1.5 feet. So I only need a half more foot. Half more foot? I only need a surface to equal 6 by 6 inches. So I went around and found a few items. Here's a little oil pastel I've encapsulated. Shouldn't work. Don't recommend it, but we're going to test it. Here I found canvas, black canvas with Molotow markers on it. A bit of fabric, which should work. We'll see what happens. And a nice birch panel, again, taped in vinyl, so I'm going to protect the edges. So visualizing it, 1/2 square foot. So I think I can do all of those, plus our original piece. Okay, so once you're ready, you want to make sure you have a clean area, clean of dust, dog hair, cat hair. You want to make sure that your artwork is elevated off the table. Here I just have little stands, just little cups I thought were kind of fun, reusable. Make sure your table is level, but also make sure your artwork is level. Here's the world's tiniest level. Set it on, make sure that you can see I'm unlevel there quite a bit. But it's artwork and collage, so everywhere you go it's going to be slightly different. If you need to raise up a side or lower a side, sometimes just a sliver of a piece of paper is enough to make a difference. Okay, same with over here. Because I protected this in vinyl, I'm not going to raise it off the table. I hope we'll be okay. And we just want to make sure we're level. I've got 3 things on paper that I'm just going to glue to the surface and cut it off later. Normally I wouldn't recommend working on your artwork, but my camera's set up this way, so I'm going to do it. Here's my container. Now if you've measured them out, resin and hardener, you would measure them in 2 containers and then dump them. I don't recommend, measuring, dumping, and then using the same container to measure and dump again. There's a thing called clingage. That's how much product stays adhered to the walls. And if you do it all in the same container, you'll have different rates of clingage. So
Hardener takes its own container, or I should say Resin takes its own container, Hardener takes its own container. But since I'm using both containers completely, yeah, I'm going to pour the resin first. Look at it. It is so lovely. Blub, 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 blub. I'm glad I can fast forward this video. So it's not hard to do this. It's very easy. What you really have to know is you have to measure accurately and stir thoroughly. Those are your big must-dos. So I think we've got almost the product out of there. I'm going to cap it momentarily and let it sit head down. And here comes the hardener. Here comes the hardener. I'm thinking it's a little bit more fluid. A little bit. And you can actually squeeze the container and force it out a little bit faster than the other one. Okay, so now we have the whole container squeezed out, and again I'm just going to cap it. Okay, so now thorough mixing. If you don't measure accurately or stir thoroughly, you're going to get parts that aren't going to harden. Remember, the hardener activates the resin. They recommend stirring for 3 minutes, and you have a working time of about 30 minutes, so best to take a little bit longer to stir. You can see that in stirring we've made a billion little bubbles, that's why it's starting to go milky, but at this stage we have to mix it thoroughly. The other brand we had suggested after you've stirred it for 3 minutes to pour it in a second container and mix it again, which is a really good practice to do because, as you know, in baking, sometimes when you've stirred your batter really well and then you go and pour it out, there's still bits of unstirred flour on the edges. That unstirred product in here is really detrimental. It may mean that your varnish won't harden. So it's good to take that little extra step and pour it into another container. Okay, very exciting. 3 minutes will go by in seconds. 6 minutes or so has gone by, and you can see there's quite a bit of bubbles. I've also moved this over and had to re-level everything again. Okay, so stir stick, card handy, heat gun. They also recommend a tiger torch, but a tiger torch and a plastic tablecloth I didn't think was that good. I also have my heat gun sitting on a hot pad, a silicone hot pad, just so I don't melt everything. And we'll see how it goes. So stir, stir, stir. And you can pour it in the middle. That's fun and dramatic, but I like to do kind of a square. Nice and thick. Square within a square, I guess. Whoa, that got heavy over there. Okay. So we'll see how good that is. And I'm going to sneak over here and pour that at the same time. And then we'll see how level we really are. So I'm going to hold back some of that. I'm just going to start it. Center. Help it along. Like that, nice and level. Okay. I can feel where it's thick and I'm just going to keep pushing it. And when you get to the edges, it's pretty easy to let surface tension just keep you there, which is what I'm going to try and do. If it falls over the edge, you can just use your rubber glove to smear it and make the whole edge nice and glossy. Rubber gloves, please put on rubber gloves. Feels like I don't quite have enough. So I'm going to pour a bit more on. Not a lot, just enough to help it get to the edge. This here is bumpy and raised, so I really have to make sure that I get past all the little edges. Okay, so here you can see I've spent a lot of time making sure it's completely coated, no little rivers of empty spots. I put my gloves on because as I kept
moving this around and around and around, I got really coated. Had to keep my thumb empty so I could turn on the camera. So you can see it's really well covered. There's no misses. And I can say there's no smell. Kind of smells sweet and a little bit painty, but it doesn't smell like solventy, which is really nice. So teachers and people working in apartments will really like this. I can see a lot of bubbles. So let's take out this heat gun here, and it's going to get a little noisy. So sorry for that.
Can you see bubbles popping? Like glitter.
So the air of the heat gun actually pushed some of the product to the edge. So I'm just going to take my finger and clean up the edges. If there's anything sticking over the edge, it won't be a big blob. It'll just be a nice little glossy spot. Looks really good. Some parts are really stubborn. I'm not sure why, but they're just a little bit stubborn. And there's some areas that were a little bit too much texture, where the palette knife brought the acrylic up too high, or the raised edge of the relief. It's going to stick out a little bit. So to do this properly, you might have to do 2 coats. I'm going to leave it. It's our store demo. And the last thing you want to do, particularly in the wintertime, if you're in a northern climate and your heat kicks on, blowing dust in the air that can then settle in on your artwork, is you want to make sure that you have something to cover the artwork and just protect it. So leave it like that and wait 24 hours and we'll see what it looks like. Hi. So it's been just seconds for you and 27 hours for me, and we're back in the studio to see how our resin turned out. Look at this beautiful little edge. Remember, we taped the edges, and glad to say nothing spilled over the edges. I did tear off some of my paint, so with the tape, so you have to watch that, but no resin on the edges. Awesome. And just a beautiful, lovely coating. Can you see that? Yay. So I can also tell you this is a no odor product. We did this in my house. I didn't smell it the whole time. So 2 thumbs up on the no odor, ease of use, ease of cleanup. And now to reveal our finished sample. You can see all of it in its glossy glory, nicely resin coated. There are little things I wanted to show you, and I want them to work flawlessly in your projects, but in my store samples, I don't mind if I have a little bit of oopses to show, because then I really have something to point to and say, watch out for this. So let me share some of those oopses with you. Okay, let's take a really close look at this. The graphite, beautiful. The silk screen. The resin, nice metallic still glows, but can you see those little bumpy bumps sticking out? Little too high. Watercolor, beautifully encapsulated. Block print there. Here's one like I wanted to show you. Can you see that little extra bit of acrylic that was sticking up because of the palette knife or whatever I used to scoop the design with? But the layers of acrylic completely disappeared. So you can do quite thick, but if it sticks out too much, you will see it. Oil painting, absolutely perfect. Zentangle, absolutely perfect. Chiagami, again, the gold metallic looks wonderful. Pen and ink, and here I want to show you that little bit of edge where obviously I didn't coat it properly, or the resin wicked in behind. So now you can see that it has darkened and discolored the paper. I don't think it looks bad in this piece, but when you're not expecting it, that is not good. So that little bit of coating that we did at the beginning was ultra important for this one. So I should have done it, I guess, on the back too, or really make sure that things are glued down and sealed. Obviously it wasn't there. The Conte and the graphite, lovely. Acrylic painting, no problem. The photocopy turned out well. Here is gold paint, gold leaf, and this is where we had that extra layer. And it's visually interesting, but you can't feel it and you can't see it. Yummy. So it will take a little bit of dimension, just not quite that much, but a layer of thick railroad board or Bristol paper was fine on top of the paper, on top of the gold leaf. Here's Copic marker. Alcohol markers will not bloom or smear.
And here is a photocopy that's been colored with pencil crayons. It turned out fantastic. So all in all, really successful. I had one little edge that dripped over. Not devastating. I'm going to take, you can just see there's a little blob there. I'm just going to take and sand that off and sand it and prime it again. And this whole edge will just look like beautiful lacquer. Lovely. So let me show you something else I tried, which I'm really happy worked. The Molotow markers on the, what was this? Black primed canvas paper. But what this shows me is you can do all sorts of things. If you love to draw with paint markers, go ahead and put resin on them. Lovely. Here's the oil pastel. When it sat, you could see the paper curled, and where it lifted up, of course, all the resin fell off the edge. And what I anticipate happening, and Golden will agree with me, this is an oil pastel. We did coat it in GAC 500 and we have poured resin on it. But remember, resin does not stick to wax. GAC 500 will not stick to wax. And remember what else it doesn't stick to? Vinyl. So here's what's going to happen. Over time, I'm going to go down here and peel this right off my tablecloth. And I suspect in 4 or 5 years' time, that's what's going to happen to this artwork. I'll be able to go pick, and lift this right off. So not recommended, but it is a fabulous looking piece for now, but not longevity there. Here for fun, we tried Jacquard's Inkjet Silk, which has been inkjet printed, so you get nice lettering, wonderful translucency. It was sitting on the plastic cloth, and as it absorbed water, it really went wrinkly. So again, I've got not a perfect coverage there. Can you see it's kind of wrinkled? Don't know what I'm going to do with this, but we're going to see if having fabric embedded in the resin will make it more rigid and less likely to break. Might be more sculptural possibilities with that. But all in all, I think this ArtResin is a winner. The low odor, ease of use, and multiple things that you can put it on, and affordability. I think you're really going to enjoy it. So thumbs up from us.